What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 358 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher here with Drew Dinkmeyer to talk an unusual subject. Unusual Suspects, a really good movie, with the Jontay Porter, Shohei Ohtani. Certainly a big newsy day in the sports gambling streets, which I'm sure most of you listening are quite involved with. So we'll give some thoughts on what happened, what could happen, and overall just how this could affect how the sports gambling marketplace is shaped. With me to do so is Drew Dinkmeyer. How's it going?
It's going well. Yeah. When this Jontay Porter situation broke last night, Adrian Wojnarowski tweeting details about the investigation, the league investigation into Jontay Porter's performance and related prop betting markets. It felt like something that is in our wheelhouse, something that we could offer perspective on, and something that we probably need to offer perspective on, given that we operate in this market so consistently. So it's a little bit of a break from playoff basketball and talking through that analysis. And the NBA schedule has been filled with non-contending teams and large spreads, so it's not a bad time to have something else to talk about than the on-court basketball, but certainly challenging subject matter to try to talk about fairly and understanding like our perspectives and our bias as we've created a living out of trying to help people improve at wagering on sports, whether through daily fantasy sports or through sports betting on the prop side. So subject matter that is close to our heart, that we obviously have a perspective that has been shaped and influenced by our history, and we want to be able to sort of share that perspective and have kind of a thoughtful discussion on the future of sports betting and how this Jontay Porter situation might unfold.
Yeah, so if you're not too into the news, let me give you kind of the rundown here. So Adrian Wojnarowski broke a pretty big story, one of his biggest, about Jontay Porter involved in betting props. Two games he mentioned were January 6th and March 20th. And, it's sourced pretty heavily here with 3-point props, some of his prop lines. And then also he was injured for an eye injury, had an illness that, basically these money makers that Woj had mentioned from DraftKings was the biggest money maker for them. So quite scary. We could talk about the punishment that's going to come here, but just first impressions on when you read this story. Just to give you some more background here, there's some other articles from some Raptors guys that they've been sharing, talking about Jontay Porter's history with, talking about cryptocurrency. He was making wagers on college basketball when he wasn't in the NBA, talked about some other stuff when he wasn't employed by the NBA. As I'm sure you guys know, there is a strict no betting on the NBA if you are in the NBA, not even if you're just a player. If you're any part of the team, you cannot bet NBA. So think just first impressions when you read through this story for Jontay Porter and where this goes from here.
Yeah, there were so many things that hit me, and this is where we're gonna, go down a rabbit hole a little bit. Is just because of it's one story amongst a number that have been entering my sphere of late. Obviously, the Shohei Ohtani story that is continuing to unfold with MLB leading an investigation there into funds that Shohei Ohtani claims were stolen from him, from his interpreter that were paid out to an illegal bookie that totaled in the millions of dollars. And there's, some conspiracy theories about, Shohei Ohtani's connection, and if there's, an impact on the integrity of the game and all these different things. And then you've also been having in our area a lot of kind of pushback as the Ohtani news had broken, and now as Jontay Porter news has broken, pushback from media, from people covering it, from the close association that the leagues have made with sports gambling companies, and all of the increased potential advertising that is done in terms of adding in live odds, spreads, different things into the coverage of the games that will potentially encourage people to continue to bet. So this has all been sort of brewing around, right? And then you get the Shohei Ohtani situation, you get the Jontay Porter situation. And the first thing that comes to mind is the question of game integrity. Because I think that's the first question that most people think of when they think of sports betting. And they think back to, Sheila Jackson and the Black Sox scandal and all sorts of different iterations during history of games being impacted by bets and influences and the seedy underground nature of betting that can get its hands into sports and impact game integrity. And my first thought process on this was, this is a very clear sign that with the technology that the sports betting companies have at their disposal and their ability to quickly identify an issue that has popped up based on unusual wagering activity, this to me was a first sign of like, oh, in the legalized form of sports betting, the companies have so many tools at their disposal, and they have the government behind them to be able to, put these situations to, like, right, if a local bookie had this issue and sports betting was illegal, the local bookie can't go to the government and say, hey, help me out, there's a crime that's committed against me, because, hey, you're committing a crime. So my first thought process was, in terms of game integrity, that this is a highlight of how legalized sports betting is probably more likely to kind of nip things in the bud before they get to the point of impacting games more severely. Because I think what will happen here, and in Jontay Porter's case, what happened was there was unusual betting activity on unders of his performance, meaning the market was unusually expecting him to perform worse than what the market lines were for him. And in 2 games, he played a short stint in the first half and left both games with injury. No better way to cash an under than to not be playing, but play enough to count. Because if you don't play at all, it doesn't count. The bet gets voided. So my first thought process was, you're going to see a very, very heavy punishment on Jontay Porter if he is found to have an involvement in a connection to this. And certainly the early evidence, I know, we're in the United States of America, so it's innocent until proven guilty. But the early evidence on those 2 specific games that Adrian Wojnarowski highlighted in particular are very, very shaky in terms of considering that there's a tie there. So if he is found guilty of being involved in this manner, I would expect a harsh punishment, perhaps a suspension, perhaps a ban from the game entirely. Either way, I think it will in effect, because Jontay Porter is not a level of player or a caliber of player that the league is going to make exceptions for. I think it will result in likely the end of his NBA career, whether it's through a ban or through a suspension, that a team is just like, we're not bringing this back in to the clubhouse. And so I think that will ultimately lead to players being more educated, more aware, more concerned about these situations going forward. And I think ultimately that will all sort of help the game integrity concerns that might come about. I actually think the game integrity concerns are a much lower issue on the totem pole of sports betting's influence on sporting events and in general on society. And that's kind of where I wanted to weave this conversation a little bit in the nature of. And so when I think of sports betting and I think of the dangers of sports betting, I think of how it can prey on some of the most vulnerable people by marketing and advertising that suggests that there are ways to change your life or your status financially simply by betting on games. It seems like it would be easy. It seems like it would be a way to be able to make a bunch of money. I think it also turns fans. It can turn fans into fans of themselves as opposed to fans of teams or players or different things. And it can create at times an animosity between fan and players. We've heard this over the course of the year from coaches, from players, how they'll have fans courtside just yelling at them about, the spread or about fouling late in games or about, I need you to get 20 points, Jimmy Butler, or whatever the thing is. You see these videos of all these things, and it's changing the dynamic of appreciating the game to now appreciating a wager. And so like your whole brain chemistry around appreciating the sport sort of changes when you're using the sport as a mechanism to either improve your financial position or weaken your financial situation, since you're laying out money at risk. And I think those are the ways that I think of the negative influences of sports betting and sports gambling, and how I think the current structure of legalized sports betting can actually make these things even worse. and more challenging. And so I highlighted some of the positives of legalized sports betting in terms of game integrity. I wanted to also talk about some of the downsides of legalized sports betting, because I think this is an area that is in our circles known very well, but in the public circles, when I talk to people who do not know sports betting very well, they are always very surprised to hear about conversations about limiting, and how if you are identified as a winning gambler, you can ultimately be kind of shunned away as a customer. And in legalized sports betting scenarios, look, this can happen in non-regulated sports betting as well. Your local bookie can also say, I'm not going to take your business anymore. But in the legalized sports betting, these companies are built to make a profit. And the way that they've chosen to try to make a profit is by trying to identify which of their customer base is more likely to lose money to them versus which is more likely to make money off of them. And they are trying to narrow the customer base down that can make money off of them and heighten the customer base that can lose money to them. And what that results in is imbalances in a system. And so while we see Jontay Porter in this situation get flagged, and those people are, potentially, they are very likely quickly eliminated from the platform. There are potentially legal ramifications as well if you're found to be trying to take advantage of known information. It creates an imbalance, right? Where the books, this is representative of the books being able to limit and ban customers who they view as having an edge on them. And so you have this imbalance where sports books are trying to create a profitable business by preying on the weakest customers. They're trying to limit their customer base down to the losing bettors and then prey on them by giving them promotional offers and marketing and advertising that suggests that you can keep betting more and you're just one win away and all these different things. And that feels really gross and really bad for society. And that's engaged in a lot of ways through the legalization of it, because the legalization of it makes it more accessible for a lot of people to be able to do. So there's more people that the industry can kind of prey on and take advantage of. And so that all feels very, very bad for society. Now, we are people who benefit from this industry flourishing, right? Because we provide projections, analysis, and content and prop recommendations and DFS recommendations and all these different things to help people who want to participate in these games. So it feels, very difficult as a situation to kind of talk through and assess. But this got me thinking a lot about legalized sports betting in general. And there's a lot of things that I also feel like I've benefited from legalized sports bet, or from sports betting, from sports gaming, whether it's legal or not. But I've benefited from in terms of my thought processes on, probabilistic thinking, being risk aware, creative ways to solve problems, more critical thinking, different things like that I think are improving. And so I wanted to take the conversation in a little bit of a direction of the benefits of gambling to an individual and sports betting and investing, however you want to call it, and the downsides. And I think a lot of the conversation is obviously going to focus on downsides, and it should, because the downsides are very severe. But I also think there's benefits to it. Now, these benefits to it can be reached in other areas of life. Like if we created more math and science programs and like really invested in ways for people to think about creative problem solving, we could achieve these same things. But yeah, that's kind of where I wanted to talk through a little bit about our own individual experiences. And I know I have friends who work in this industry who have also had close personal friends who've dealt with problem gaming and different things. And so it changes the perspective. And I think the Jontay Porter situation, to me, brought up all these different emotions around game integrity, which I thought, oh, great. Like, this is a good example of like game integrity. I don't think it's going to be a huge problem going forward, because I think these sites are going to be able to sniff this stuff out pretty quickly. But then into problem gaming and the risks, or the way that the structure is set up that is imbalanced, that allows these capitalistic businesses to make money off of the weakest individuals by narrowing their player pools entirely, which is stuff we have talked about on the show for a while. So I know I've dominated the conversation a bit here, Mike, but these are some of the topics that have been rummaging around in my brain as I try to think through things. And I wanted to kind of get your experiences with sports betting and some of the positives that you see from it, while not trying to be like a marketing commercial for sports betting, but also trying to acknowledge that there are good things that come of it and there are bad things that come from it. And ultimately, like what we're trying to do with our content, with our businesses, is I think we're trying to feed into creating people who can benefit from the good parts of it, as opposed to be vulnerable to the bad parts of it. That's ultimately how I think of what we're doing. Plenty of people might call that hypocritical or misguided or short-sighted or different things, but that's how I think of what we're doing. And so I wanted to kind of have the conversation a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to talk about, like, the game was March 20th and they basically shut him down. Like, Alpha Personal story comes out on March 25th. So they caught him pretty quick. I think that's a good thing, right? So just to cover that. And then their coach Darko said that, hey, I got to trust my player. Really nothing he could do, right? Like, hey, he says he's hurt. He can't play. What are you supposed to do, right? So that's just one thing I just wanted to note there. Yeah, I've seen a lot of good and a lot of bad. One of my friends, he is a full-on degenerate. He has no limits on his accounts. He will blast off. He never gets limited. So yeah, to your point, he is preyed upon, my friend. Which most of you guys listening are probably limited because we've been doing pretty well. So there's some pretty bad side, and I mean, I've gone to Vegas and I've lost, like, even just over All-Star break, I got wrecked on gambling. And it didn't really bother me too much because I kind of assumed that, but there's certainly downside. People's lives get ruined over it, and I don't think we need to go there. But it makes the game a lot of fun. Just from like a enjoyment level for me, I can't like watch. And I mean, I watch NBA because like I need to do it for my job, but like I can't play fantasy football I can't watch NFL without having something on the line, playing DraftKings, playing FanDuel, betting, whatever it is. I just don't have it in me anymore. Again, NBA is different because it's like literally my job. But yeah, it's awesome. Like to put something down where if you lose it, whatever, but if you win, it's fun. So I think that it's a pretty good partnership from just making the game more enjoyable, and there's more interest. There's tons of studies that have shown that people who bet on games are way more interested. And I guess to tie into some of the other bad stuff here was the comments from Tyrese Halliburton and JB Bickerstaff getting like threats. And JB Bickerstaff said that, hey, I'm getting asked about lineups when I'm at the grocery store, who's going to be in, who's going to be out. People just want to know. And want to win. There was another comment from Ochak Baji talking about how no one talks about his stuff when they make bets, and they only get stuff and they have to like tune it out. It's like terrible, which is not surprising. Anything that's gambling, the stigma around old school gambling is a little bit different, but it's still there. And the classic degenerative gambler does have some bad stuff that could come with it, obviously financially, but just from personally, and just being cruel and saying things that you shouldn't say to people because they're just doing their job. But so I think that I think there's more good side than bad side, but like the bad side's affecting these players, and they shouldn't have to deal with that crap. I know, and anybody who's listening to this, I hope everyone doesn't ever do that. Like, if you lose your bet, you don't ever blame it on the player, blame it on the coach, blame it on the refs, whatever. Like, it's your bet. So I just wanted to add that really quick.
Yeah, and I like to think of the way that we're approaching things, right, is that we're trying to educate and teach people how to think through sort of a less emotional way to interact with, investing capital and gambling in these situations, right? And one of the challenges, obviously, as you've alluded to, is the gambling aspect of things can be very emotional. You can feel attached to wanting to watch with having some action on it. And then it changes your perspective of how you're enjoying the athletes and the performance. And it sort of shapes you into them working for you specifically in these instances, as opposed to them entertaining you in different things. And so it is a fine line to try to walk in terms of when you're working in this industry and when you're trying to promote the value and the positives of critical thinking, probabilistic thinking, and how it might help outside of aspects of life that are beyond sports betting. And I think for myself, I think of, just walking through some of the really positive things that I've learned over the years through gambling that I think when I walk into different, or I run into different problems in life, that I think it shapes my perspective in a different way than I think a lot of my other friends or people that are not as experienced in these things. I think of everything through probabilities now. I think like, oh, this is, maybe this is 10% likely to happen or 20% likely to happen. And I think through that probabilistic thinking helps me make more rational decisions instead of emotional decisions. And my brain has been sort of trained to try to think through situations that way. It also has led to me thinking of more creative problem solving, in terms of like, one of the things when you're trying to find edges in games that are competitive, you have to think through like, what are things that other people could be missing that I might be able to understand better. That's a great way to go through life, right? If you're trying to constantly search for things that other people might be missing or not, are underestimating or not appropriately valuing, that's a great way to be able to go through life, because you can use that skill and that knowledge to be able to try to improve in other areas of life as well. And then similarly, it's made me more risk aware and humbled, right? Like whenever you're into, forecasting the future, if you're doing it with money on the line or reputation on the line or whatever, you will get humbled because it is hard to forecast the future. There are plenty of times that you will be embarrassed by making a really, really bad forecast that you have egg all over your face because you weren't even close. And so that humility that it's taught me, along with understanding risk in, bankroll management and risk tolerance and all these different things, have all been helpful resources that have helped me in other areas of life. And some of the most rewarding feedback that I get from our job on occasion, is when I do get that note from a subscriber or something that talks about how their perspective of things has changed and it's helped them in these other areas of life. That's like the most rewarding piece of feedback that I can get for doing our job, because that for me is what's worked for me. It's helped me in all these different areas of life, but it's helped remove some of that emotionality. And so originally, when daily fantasy sports was getting very popular, you would hear these stories about how players felt like, they were getting more negative attention individually as opposed to the team, right? They were getting like heckled more individually as opposed to the team and different things. And I responded with, man, my experience has been the exact opposite, in the sense that I'm now watching all these players on all these different teams instead of my one home team, and I'm rooting for them. And so I am feeling more connected, like, oh, I'm a fan of this player, and I've become a fan of Nikola Jokic and Giannis Antetokounmpo and Steph Curry and all these players that weren't from my favorite team, in a way that when I was growing up and just watching sports through the lens of my favorite team, I just had my favorite players on my favorite team. And so for me, it was creating a broader experience of engaging positively with the game. But that is not everybody's experience, right? Plenty of people's experiences, you're the individual player that's now losing me money. I'm tired of this guy. I'm tired of losing money on this guy and this individual. And it shapes the construct negatively. And so a lot of this, as I'm thinking through, and I'm trying to think through, what are better ways to help educate people, to get more of these benefits that I've experienced as a person who has professionally gambled and created content around gambling and sports betting and DFS for a decade now. What are the ways that I can help communicate and teach and educate these skills that I think are transferable to other areas of life that can be really beneficial? And the challenge is that the system is set up in a way that just generally, if we're talking about DFS, the better you get at it, the more you're taking advantage of somebody who's not good at it, right? Who might have a problem, right? And if the answer is to like try to educate everybody to have the skills to be able to do this, well, then DFS becomes really hard for people to be able to play if everybody is equally skilled, right? It's a skill game. So then on the other side of like the props betting and sports betting, it's like, okay, if I give everybody the skills and the tools to be able to get better at this, well, the system is set up in a way that, hey, if you are identified as being really sharp or a winning gambler or so on and so forth, we're going to try to cut you down as much as possible. And the idea is like, okay, so the path to this whole industry surviving in any way, shape, or form is built on the losing players, is built on the players who are not as educated about things. Mm-hmm. And obviously a really difficult thing to grapple with when you want to perceive yourself as a teacher, as an educator, as someone helping these areas. Ultimately, if everybody was a winning sports bettor, DraftKings and FanDuel and the sports books, Caesars, MGM, whatever sports book you like to bet on, they wouldn't exist. They wouldn't have a business. They'd go out of business. They'd stop existing. And so, it's an interesting, as I reflect personally on like the quality of my work and what I'm trying to do and how I'm trying to impact society and whatnot, it's a challenging construct to try to deal with, where I feel like I can be an educator and teacher and help people in ways that can transfer to other areas of life through this thing that I love, that I am really passionate about, that I got good at. But understanding that it's all kind of built on the struggles of other people, and really like a lot of industries are like that. And so I don't want to, lose sight, but that's one of the challenges of this whole thing, is like, we're trying to help eliminate the bad habits to get you away from the problem gaming behavior by trying to teach you the right tools to be able to analyze and assess markets. And those skills, when learned, can be super, super valuable and transferable to other areas of life. But they're all kind of predicated on taking advantage of the people who don't know. And that's challenging to like come to grips with.
Yeah. And then, you talked about those books doing well. How many sports books have closed down? Because the sports books that are closing down aren't getting those casual bettors. They don't know about them. Like the win bets and all those, like they're getting a bunch of sharp money. They just can't hang and generate enough money there. I wanted to hit one topic before I forget. So just going back to the integrity of the game, because this is probably the most important topic. Like it would have to be like one of these like two-way players, right? People who like aren't making money hand over fist. Obviously, people talk about the referees making what, $250K a year or so, ballpark, up to 550 there. So like you're not like, LeBron doesn't need the money, obviously, go on down the line, right? But like, and then does that? So the first thing I thought too was like, okay, are we not going to get as big of a menu? Are we not going to get, like DraftKings will line up the whole rotation? That was like my biggest concern. Like, just thoughts on that. Do you think that what happened with Jontay Porter is going to affect what lines we're going to see or anything of that nature?
I think it could to some extent, but the thing that I saw, one of the I think it was a Brooklyn Nets account that I have in a list somewhere. It was like a Nets fan account, not the Nets account, but tweeted like, why are there even two-way markets on players of this caliber, right? And it's interesting because I think a lot of people are like, oh, why are you betting on Reggie Bullock or Jontay Porter or Cam Payne or different things like that? And a lot of people, and you'll notice, like, we have tried to tailor our betting recommendations to things that are widely available, meaning they're covered by multiple books. There's adequate liquidity on them. And you'll notice that a lot of those bets are not on those types of players. They are not anymore. When we first started the betting product, that's where we found a lot of our highest edge stuff. And we were getting out a lot of that stuff, but we got feedback from customers that, hey, there's not a lot of liquidity on this stuff. So, maybe you're inflating your record on stuff that can't really be bet on, so on and so forth. So we adapted over time. But the reason that the books put out stuff like that, right? And this is where I think you got to always think of the perspective, is why is a book throwing out a reserve player line, right? Why do they think they can, handle and efficiently line that market? I don't think they are. I think they're throwing that out to get more information on who's a sharp bettor, because the casual bettor is not going out there and betting money on Jontay Porter. They're betting on Scotty Barnes or LeBron James or so on and so forth, right? They're betting on the known players that they're going to watch on that given night. They're not betting on a backup center. So it's, in a lot of ways, the books that are putting out these lines are doing so to collect information about how sharp you are, about that they can use to then better profile you for the future, to be able to, and they have really low limits on these. So that's why, like, a lot of people will ask, Circa is a sports book that in our community has gotten a lot of popular attention for being willing to take money, not limiting bettors, so on and so forth. Their props menu is just star players, right? And there's a reason for that. It's because they can efficiently line those players more appropriately, and that's why they will take bigger limits, whereas the limits will be lower on books that will have these really wide menus because they're offering, here, come bet anything you want, but you can't bet too much because we can't price it really correctly. And so do I think it will impact how books choose to line players like this? I think the only way it'll impact things is if there's regulation associated with it. Because I actually think the books, even though lining those players is a losing cause long term, it's from their vantage point, they're probably doing it to garner information that can help profile bettors more going forward. So I think it's probably, they view it as in their interest to continue to line those types of players to get not only more action, but to get better profiling of bettors that are using their experience, and then being able to, limit them or, categorize them differently.
Yeah, it's going to be something that we'll be watching for sure. But yeah, that was wild. And then one other thing, do you think that people who like bet Jontay stuff those days, what do you think? Do you even want to talk about that? Like, I think that's,
I don't know legally the potential ramifications well enough to speculate on what it could be if the ramifications extend beyond just losing your account simply. My understanding of like what we've seen in the past with college basketball players that were involved in betting scandals and throwing games and whatnot, that there were legal ramifications for those players. So I could certainly see that being the case for the bettors, but it's more a threat to be in the case of the player, because he's the one impacting the integrity of the game and his performance and different things like this. And so I don't know what the end result will be there. I imagine that there will be whether it's a federal or civil case, I imagine that there will be a case brought against the people who bet meaningful. And if you read the Wojnarowski story, he basically said, typical limits on bets are like in the $1,000, $2,000 range, and people are trying to place tens of thousands of dollars on these situations, which is just such an obvious red flag situation. And it's one of those things that, the sports betting industry over time has evolved into, because books are trying to profile you and identify the money that's coming, it has evolved. If you listen to like Billy Walters and different things, it's evolved over time into, or Haralabob has talked about his ability to mask his bets by using people who had been losing bettors to make bets and different things like that. The game has largely evolved for at the very top level to obfuscating who's making the bet and the quality of how sharp they are to making the bet to be able to get more money down on situations. And in this idea, the person trying to rob the bank for the first time is going in without understanding the security system at all, and just like betting a bunch of money and thinking they're going to walk away with it. And it's naive, obviously, but it's interesting in an industry that has evolved to sort of encourage the professional bettors to try to obfuscate where the money is coming from and to try to confuse the sports book into understanding where the money is coming from. In this situation, the naive sports bettor is coming in and being like, oh, I've got this edge, I'm just going to hammer it with as much money as I can get down, and not understanding that that's going to create a bunch of flags that's going to get their, it's going to get the bet under review. It's going to get obviously all this attention brought to it.
Yeah, you talking reminded me of this movie, Lucky Number 11. This guy goes in and he wants to bet $20K on a 9-to-1 horse, and the bookie's like, "I'm not giving you 9-to-1. I'm giving you 2-to-1. You obviously know something." So it's like kind of the same thing. But great movie, by the way. So yeah, that wanted to note that. And then, do you want to talk to the Shohei Ohtani stuff at all? I didn't want to like put him kind of down the list.
I think
it's a little bit different. But go ahead.
It's obviously outside of the realm of basketball, so I don't think there's much time we should spend on it. I think wait for the facts and the details of the case to kind of emerge. I think one of the challenging things about all of this is when it is a star player, the incentives are a little bit more aligned towards trying to make sure for the league, for the TV partners, for everybody, the incentives are a little bit more aligned for everybody to try to find someone else to blame. And that's the one thing that's a little bit challenging of evaluating this situation is when the incentives are kind of misaligned. When it's a reserve player, it's easier for the incentives to be aligned by saying, let's just get this player out of the league. They don't create any extra revenue for the league. We'll use it as a teaching experience to our other players, and we'll try to shore up the perception of the integrity of the game. But when it's the star player, and Shohei Ohtani is the star in baseball, he is the player that I think is most associated with Major League Baseball right now. Mm-hmm. That is a different conversation. Incentives are different for all the partners in that game, the TV broadcast partners, the league itself, the team, the player, so on and so forth. And so I think it's difficult to not, have an eye of skepticism towards how it's going to result just because everybody's incentives are kind of aligned on the same side of the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much with you there. But yeah, just if you missed it, he's like, I had nothing to do with it. Basically it's all him, and he felt betrayed and all that. So, which he had to. I mean, if he said anything else, it'd be really, really bad.
And who knows what the truth is on this manner. But ultimately, like, that's the approach that he has to take in this situation, and hopefully it is. Hopefully that is the situation that he was just sort of taken advantage of, and it's dealt with. The legal process kind of deals with it and makes him whole, and hopefully that's where we go on this whole thing. But you certainly wonder. There's a lot of question marks around that situation in particular. But yeah, I wanted to use all of these different situations that are happening in and around our industry as an opportunity to kind of talk through some of the challenges and some of the benefits of sports betting and gambling in general, and where the way that I view our place in the industry and what we're trying to accomplish is trying to educate our customer base to be more prepared and more aware to not only make good risk-weighted decisions, but also to be able to hopefully take that decision-making process and expand it to other areas of life that are also beneficial. And obviously what we're doing in all these games when we're playing against an opponent, whether it's the book or, Joe across the street when we're playing DFS, we're trying to create an edge over them. We're trying to take advantage of those who know less than us, which is a lot of business just generally, but that's what we're trying to do. And so it's obviously, I think if you're a introspective person, I think whenever these big societal things like challenge the industry that you're working in, I think it's worthwhile to talk through and share your perspectives on them, not only to come to some sort of understanding from yourself about, where there's a line for you that you might not be comfortable crossing, or you might feel like is not that big of a deal, or whatever it is. But I think it's also important to kind of communicate to the customer base and the people that are participating in this industry on how you view or think through these situations, because I think ultimately people want to give their business and work with people who they feel they are aligned with in terms of their approach and thinking on things. And so I think it's important to share our opinions when the industry has its challenges, like it certainly has in the last few weeks in terms of the media coverage of sports betting.
Yeah, two more things I just wanted to add really quick. So, if people were betting on Jontay with inside info, it's kind of reminding me a little bit about Draymond, but that was not inside info. That was like clear as day. This is going to happen. As long as you're quick, you can get out there and basically get a free automatic win there. So I just wanted to note that if you have any thoughts there. And then also, we've seen like a big ramp up of integrating sports betting content. Last week there was this talk of putting on the interface of like, you could actually bet on the game live on the screen. And, that led to a lot of people tweeting about that. I'm wondering if that gets dialed back just to kind of give a little cooling off period. Are we going to see the TNT FanDuel promos that we get every show? Are they going to do that? Like, is there any sort of like cooling off period here? Or do you think they're just going to go full steam ahead and basically just like ignore it?
Yeah, I don't know. There's such a financial investment in the game from these companies that that the leagues are incentivized to be able to continue to promote them. So I don't know. I think the league is going to continue to kind of test and feel out boundaries on what they're comfortable with and make decisions as they go. Sure, there might be some tapping of the brakes on new innovation, maybe to just let it cool off and see where things go. Mm-hmm. From my vantage point, I obviously like to engage with the games from a betting perspective but I do think that I do think we need to market the game. The game needs to be the reason people are watching.
Mm-hmm.
The enjoying and liking the game needs to be the main reason people are watching. And sure, if you're adding into your market by tapping into some people who wouldn't watch unless they had some action, and you can cater to them a little bit, I think that's great. We all wanted, fantasy sports to be a little bit covered more in the mainstream. 5-6 years ago, we all wanted sports betting to be like recognized and like not have Al Michaels making like insinuations at the end of the games. We want it to be kind of out in the open. But I don't, as a sports gambling person, I don't want the whole broadcast to be about gambling.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what I want. Like, I think there's room for that to service a market of people that do want those things. But I want the game to still be the highlighted reason that we're watching and participating in this event, not all the bets associated with it. And I think some of these things are starting to overreach into the level of attention that it's taking from the game. And I think that then creates a disincentive for people who loved the game and just love the game for the game they're like, this is kind of gross now. This isn't what I signed up for. And so you start turning your fan base, a small percentage over time, away from the people who love the game to the people who love gaming on the game. And I think it's good to add those people to your fan base, but your core fan base has got to be people that love the game. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the way these games grow will be, less authentic and less kind of, from the ground up. So that's my concern, is that I think we're maybe leaning a little bit too far, and you got to test these boundaries. You don't know what's too far until you cross the line, right? And then you got to pull it back. But I think we might be starting to lean a little bit too far into like the added benefits of who we've brought into the games and their enjoyment of them versus promoting the game and loving the game itself being the primary reason that you're interacting with the entertainment value of things.
For sure. I saw the NFL had like a global markets program trying to expand with teams associated with countries. So that was pretty cool, just to grow the overall brands and all that for the teams. All right. This was fun, interesting and fun. I don't know if fun would be the word, but definitely it was nice to dig in here. And yeah, just from really quick, I love it. I love gambling. I know I talked a lot about the downside, but the positives are really good. I just wanted to shout out, the people we saw in Denver when we had the ETR meetup, talking about like paying for weddings, paying for vacations, and all that. So yeah, just to say, I've had some good bets, the Marcus Smart bet and all that. It's been great, but it's tough. So anything else to mention to get us out of here?
Yeah, before we get out of here, just on like final wrap on the pod here. Hopefully, sharing our perspective and our thought processes on these things can help, maybe resonate with you and the listener, and understand kind of where we feel like we're fitting in, make you think about these issues and how, hopefully how the skills that we're teaching are helping impact you in different ways. That's ultimately the goal here. But as always, if you're enjoying the content that we're putting out, the best way to support it is to drop a rating and review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. That helps give us feedback on how to create these podcasts. We have been mixing in more kind of holistic, top-down thinking podcasts in a mix with our bottom-up team-based podcast during the course of the year. Some of that is from feedback from you all, so appreciate the feedback that we can continue to get there. You can check out more of our content on our YouTube channel, Established Run NBA, on YouTube, where you can find our daily injury shows Monday through Friday with myself, Mike Gallagher, and Mark Dankenbring, talking through the NBA injury analysis show and breaking down the injury report each and every day to get you prepared. Late season NBA DFS and sports betting, that's obviously very important. So please continue to check out our content on YouTube. If you're interested in any of our premium product offerings and the stuff that we're trying to do at Established Run, you can go to establishedrun.com/subscribe-MBA for more details on our premium product offerings. They provide you the resources, tools, projections, analytics, content to help you set DFS lineups and make prop bets as well. So, if you are a avid sports better or interested in getting better in the space and you're looking for a reputable group to try to help navigate you in that path, we are here to do so. And hopefully this content helps shine some light on the way we approach and the way we're trying to handle our business with care.
All right, so that's going to do it. We'll be back on Thursday to talk more NBA, the on-ball stuff. So I appreciate you guys listening. Catch you guys next time.